You don't have a motivation problem, you have a pain avoidance problem. And until you understand that, nothing in your life will change. Because every time life asks you for effort, for discomfort, for discipline, you quietly step back and choose ease. And that silent decision is the exact moment your future gets smaller. Before we go deeper, if you want more brutally honest, high-level mindset content like this, make sure you subscribe, because this channel is built for people who are serious about leveling up, not just feeling good for 5 minutes. Now understand this clearly. Most people are not stuck because they lack intelligence, opportunity, or even time. They are stuck because they have trained themselves to escape discomfort at every possible moment. They wake up and reach for their phone instead of their purpose. They feel resistance and instantly look for distraction. They hit a challenge and immediately start negotiating with themselves. And over time, this pattern becomes their identity. A person who avoids pressure becomes a person who cannot carry weight. And a person who cannot carry weight can never rise, because every level of success demands a heavier version of you, mentally, emotionally, and physically. The truth is simple but uncomfortable. Growth is not found in comfort. It is extracted from resistance. It is built in the moments you want to quit but choose not to. It is formed when your mind says, "This is too hard," and you respond with action instead of excuses. And most people never reach that version of themselves because they are addicted to relief, not progress. They want the reward without the process, the confidence without the challenge, the respect without the discipline. And life does not work that way. Imagine your life like a battlefield, not in a violent sense, but in a strategic sense. Every single day is a test of positioning, decision-making, and endurance. And in this battlefield, there are two types of players: those who move toward pressure and those who retreat from it. The ones who move toward it sharpen their instincts. They become more focused, more resilient, more dangerous in a productive sense, while the ones who retreat become slower, weaker, and more dependent on comfort. And over time, the gap between these two groups becomes massive, not because one group is gifted, but because one group made peace with discomfort and the other ran from it. Think of it like chess. Every strong move requires sacrifice. You give up position to gain advantage. You accept temporary loss to create long-term control. And if you play the game trying to protect every piece, avoiding every risk, you don't win. You slowly get cornered. And that is exactly how most people live. They protect their comfort. They avoid risk. They delay effort. And without realizing it, they trap themselves in a smaller and smaller life. Pain, in this context, is not your enemy. It is your signal. It is the indicator that you are stepping outside the version of yourself that has kept you average. It is the friction that reshapes your identity. And when you start seeing it this way, everything changes. The early mornings stop feeling like punishment and start feeling like preparation. The hard work stops feeling like suffering and starts feeling like construction. The discipline stops feeling like restriction and starts feeling like control. The problem is not that pain exists. The problem is that you have been conditioned to interpret it incorrectly. You feel discomfort and assume something is wrong, when in reality something is finally right. Because for the first time, you are not escaping, you are confronting. And confrontation is where transformation lives. Look at your daily decisions. Not your big dreams, your daily decisions, because that is where the truth is. Every time you choose the easier option, you reinforce a weaker identity. Every time you delay effort, you train your mind to prioritize comfort over growth. And these small decisions stack. They compound. Until one day you look at your life and wonder why nothing has changed. But the answer is hidden in those moments you thought didn't matter. Discipline is not about intensity. It is about consistency under pressure. It is about doing what needs to be done, even when your emotions are not aligned, especially when they are not aligned, because emotions are temporary, but standards are permanent. And if your standards are low, your life will reflect that with brutal accuracy. You have to raise the standard, not just in words, but in action, in behavior, in what you tolerate from yourself. Because the moment you start accepting less effort, less focus, less responsibility, you begin a slow decline that is hard to notice in the moment, but impossible to ignore over time. Strong individuals are not built in comfort. They are built in controlled adversity. They intentionally place themselves in situations that demand more from them. They seek out challenges, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they understand the reward on the other side. They understand that every layer of discomfort they conquer expands their capacity, and capacity is everything. Your ability to handle pressure determines your ability to achieve results. If you cannot handle pressure, you will sabotage opportunities, you will avoid challenges, you will settle for less, and then you will try to justify it with logic, telling yourself stories about timing, circumstances, or luck. When the real issue is internal, it is your relationship with discomfort. Change that relationship, and everything starts to shift. You begin to lean into effort instead of avoiding it. You start to see obstacles as training rather than barriers. You develop a level of self-respect that cannot be faked because you know what you have endured and overcome, and that confidence is different. It is not loud. It is not based on validation. It is built on evidence, your own actions, your own consistency. The world rewards people who can operate under pressure, who can stay focused when things are difficult, who can execute when others hesitate. And this is not reserved for a special group of people. It is available to anyone willing to make a different choice in those critical moments. The moment when you feel resistance, the moment when you want to quit, the moment when your mind starts negotiating for comfort. That is your opportunity. That is your test. And most people fail it without even realizing it because they think the test is something external, something dramatic, when in reality, it is quiet, it is internal. It is happening in your mind every single day. Stop waiting for a perfect moment. Stop waiting to feel ready. Stop waiting for motivation. Because those are all forms of avoidance disguised as preparation. You do not become ready and then act. You act and then become ready. You move first and your mindset follows, not the other way around. Raise your tolerance for discomfort deliberately. Do things that challenge you not recklessly, but intentionally. Push your limits in controlled ways. Build the habit of finishing what you start, of showing up when you don't feel like it, of maintaining focus when distractions are easier. Because every time you do that, you are sending a message to yourself that you are in control, that your actions are not dictated by convenience, that your standards are higher than your excuses. This is where real power comes from, not from external validation, not from temporary motivation, but from internal discipline, from the ability to do what is necessary regardless of how you feel. And once you develop that, everything else becomes easier. Not because life gets easier, but because you become stronger, more capable, more resilient, and that changes the way you experience everything. So the next time you feel that urge to avoid, to delay, to escape, recognize it for what it is. Not a signal to stop, but a signal to step forward, to lean in, to prove to yourself that you are not controlled by comfort. Because every time you win that internal battle, you are not just completing a task, you are building a different identity. One decision at a time, one action at a time, one moment of discipline stacked on top of another, until there is no version of you left that runs from pressure, only the version that moves through it, adapts to it, and uses it as fuel to go further than most people ever will. And once you start operating from that place, something subtle but powerful begins to shift inside you, because you're no longer negotiating with discomfort. You're no longer asking, how can I avoid this? Instead, you start asking, how can I use this? And that question alone separates people who stay stuck from people who evolve. Because now every difficult moment becomes raw material. Every challenge becomes a tool. Every setback becomes information. And instead of shrinking when things get harder, you expand to meet them. Understand this clearly. Your mind is constantly watching what you do, not what you say, not what you plan, not what you promise, but what you actually execute. And based on that, it builds a version of you quietly, consistently, without emotion. If you repeatedly choose ease, your mind categorizes you as someone who avoids effort. If you repeatedly choose discipline, your mind starts to trust you as someone who follows through. And that trust is everything. Because once your mind trusts you, hesitation decreases, resistance weakens, and action becomes more natural. Most people are trapped in a cycle where they don't trust themselves. They say they will wake up early, but they don't. They say they will work harder, but they delay. They say they will stay focused, but they get distracted. And over time, this creates a gap between intention and action. And that gap destroys confidence, not because they are incapable, but because they have trained themselves to break their own word. Rebuilding that trust is not about big dramatic changes. It is about small, consistent proof, doing what you said you would do, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient, because inconvenience is the exact environment where discipline is tested and strengthened. Think about it like forging metal. You don't shape steel in comfort. You shape it under heat and pressure. You expose it to intensity. You force it to adapt. And in that process, it becomes something stronger, more durable, more refined. And you are no different. Your character is forged in the same way, through controlled exposure to difficulty, through repeated encounters with resistance, through choosing effort when ease is available. And here is where most people misunderstand the process. They think they need to feel ready before they start. They think they need the perfect mindset, the perfect plan, the perfect timing. But readiness is not a prerequisite. It is a byproduct. It comes after action, not before it. And waiting for it is just another form of delay, another way to stay comfortable while pretending to prepare. The reality is, clarity comes from movement, not from overthinking. You figure things out by doing, by engaging, by making mistakes and adjusting, not by sitting still and analyzing endlessly. Because analysis without action leads to paralysis. And paralysis is just avoidance wearing a smarter mask. You have to break that pattern. You have to interrupt it deliberately. The moment you catch yourself overthinking, hesitating, delaying, you act, even if it's imperfect, even if it's uncomfortable, because action is the antidote to avoidance. It disrupts the cycle. It creates momentum, and momentum is powerful. Once you start moving, it becomes easier to keep moving. But the first step is always the hardest because it requires you to go against your current conditioning. Your current conditioning is built on past choices, on repeated behaviors, on patterns that have been reinforced over time, and changing that requires conscious effort. It requires you to do things that feel unnatural at first, to choose discipline when your instincts say comfort, to stay focused when your mind looks for distraction, to continue when quitting feels easier. And yes, it will feel uncomfortable because you are stepping outside of what you have normalized, but that discomfort is temporary. It is a sign of transition, not a permanent state. What becomes permanent is the result of pushing through it, the increased capacity, the stronger mindset, the higher standard you set for yourself. And once you raise that standard, you cannot unsee it. You cannot go back to your old patterns without feeling it, without recognizing that you are operating below your potential. And that awareness creates a different kind of pressure, not external, but internal. The kind that pushes you to stay aligned with who you are becoming. This is where discipline evolves into identity. It is no longer something you force. It becomes something you embody. You are no longer someone trying to be disciplined. You are someone who operates with discipline. And that shift is critical because when something becomes part of your identity, it no longer requires constant negotiation. It becomes your default. But getting to that point requires repetition. It requires consistency. It requires you to show up again and again, especially on the days when you don't feel like it, because those are the days that matter most. Anyone can perform when they feel motivated, when everything is aligned, when the energy is high. But the real difference is made on the days when none of that is present, when you are tired, distracted, unmotivated, and you still execute. That is where the gap is created. That is where you separate yourself from the average mindset. Average is not a lack of potential. It is a pattern of choices, small, repeated decisions that prioritize comfort over growth. And breaking out of that requires awareness first, recognizing the patterns, catching yourself in the act of avoiding, and then choosing differently, even if it's just slightly differently at first. Because even a small shift in behavior, repeated consistently, leads to significant change over time. You don't need to transform everything overnight. You need to start with what is in front of you, the next decision, the next action, the next moment where you have a choice between ease and effort. And you choose effort not because it feels good, but because it aligns with the person you are building. And this is where self-respect is developed, not from what you say about yourself, but from what you prove to yourself through action, through consistency, through discipline. Self-respect is earned internally. It is the result of keeping your standards high, even when no one is watching, even when there is no immediate reward, even when it would be easy to take shortcuts. Shortcuts might give you temporary relief, but they come at the cost of long-term growth. They weaken your foundation, and without a strong foundation, nothing you build will last. So you have to decide what you are optimizing for, short-term comfort or long-term strength, because you cannot fully have both. One will always come at the expense of the other, and the choice you make repeatedly will define your trajectory. If you continue to choose comfort, you will stay in a familiar place, predictable, safe, but limited. And over time, that limitation will become more noticeable, more frustrating, because deep down you will know you are capable of more, but you are not acting on it. And that internal conflict creates dissatisfaction. On the other hand, if you choose discipline, if you lean into discomfort, you will face resistance, you will experience difficulty, but you will also expand, you will grow, you will unlock levels of capability that you didn't have before. And that creates a different kind of satisfaction, one that is not dependent on external validation, but rooted in your own progress. Progress is addictive in the best way. Once you start seeing what you are capable of, once you start experiencing the results of consistent effort, it changes your perspective. It raises your expectations. It makes it harder to settle for less because you have evidence of what more looks like. And at that point, avoiding pain becomes less appealing because you understand the cost. You see clearly what you lose when you choose ease, not just in terms of results, but in terms of identity, in terms of who you are becoming. So you start to approach discomfort differently, not as something to escape, but as something to engage with, to learn from, to use as a tool for growth. And that mindset shift is powerful because it turns obstacles into opportunities. It turns resistance into training. It turns pressure into preparation. And the more you operate from that mindset, the more resilient you become, not because life gets easier, but because you become better at handling it. You develop the ability to stay focused under pressure, to maintain discipline in the face of distraction, to continue moving forward even when progress feels slow. And that ability compounds over time. It builds momentum, it creates results, and those results reinforce the behavior, creating a cycle of growth instead of a cycle of avoidance. But it all starts with a decision, a simple but significant decision to stop running from discomfort and start moving toward it, to stop negotiating with your lower instincts and start acting in alignment with your higher standards, to stop waiting for the perfect moment and start using the current one, because the opportunity to change is always in the present. It is always in the next decision you make, and the direction of your life is determined not by what you intend to do, but by what you consistently choose to do when it matters most. And now you understand the truth. Most people spend years avoiding that strength is not something you wish for. It is something you build by facing what is difficult instead of escaping it, by choosing action over comfort again and again until it becomes who you are. And if something inside you is telling you it's time to level up, then don't ignore that signal. Act on it immediately. Start today, not tomorrow, not later, because delay is the silent killer of potential. And if you're serious about becoming sharper, more disciplined, and more focused every single day, then make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe right now, because we're pushing for that 1,000 subscriber target and we're not slowing down. So be part of it, move fast, take action, and lock yourself into a mindset that refuses to stay average.